One of the great big sticking points with Ernest Hemingway and maybe a fading readership is it's possible to read a lot of Ernest Hemingway's short stories and come away with the impression of, so what? Who cares? So what? And this short story raises the question of, well, what if, so what, for the characters themselves. Welcome to Strip Coverlet, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Fort, and we are here for another short story discussion, which will appear in two separate playlists here on the channel. Number one being the short story discussion playlist. Number two being the Ernest Hemingway read-along. We are going short story by short story through the Finca Vigia edition, and it looks like we're about coming up on the halfway mark, at least I believe so. The short story in question today is known as Today is Friday. This video will have three sections: a So What Happened short story recap, a literary criticism section where we talk about the literary goings on in this short story, and finally, a writer's corner. I have two notes for writers as we read this short story from Ernest Hemingway as well. So, what happened? Well, there are three Roman soldiers at a bar run by a Hebrew man. The third soldier is sick. The first soldier did some dirty deeds today, and the second soldier is kind of forgettable. The bar owner has, today, I almost passed over it myself. Those three Roman soldiers crucified Christ. Surprise. The bar owner has to close shop, and the three men go on their way. So, what is it about this short story that makes it worth reading? What is the literary criticism to go on here? Well, I think the first thing is we have to question this. They say in this short story, one of them asks him, "You are a Christer, aren't you?" "You're a regular Christer, big boy," the second soldier says to the first soldier. This is what lets us know that they had crucified Christ. Now, on number one of the literary criticism section there, I have the caption "A" or "the." During this time period, there were a lot of people going around claiming to be Christ. Is this a Christ or the Jesus Christ in question in this short story? We don't really know, other than to say that someone had pierced his side with a spear, and we'll get into this a little bit later. But there is, I think, reason to believe that Hemingway is aiming at this being the Christ as opposed to a Christ. Now, listening to that, it's sort of, is it sacrilegious to say a Christ? Is it sacrilegious to believe that there were multiple people running around claiming to be the Christ at this time, claiming to be the Savior of the Hebrews at this time, claiming their own church in Judaism at this time? Or is it more sacrilegious for these three to have crucified the Christ and be going out and getting drinks afterwards? Right? This does not seem to be a very big deal to these people. This is another day to these people. So I'm not sure which one would be necessarily more offensive if you consider yourself in the camp of the offended. But it does raise the question, is this a Christ or the Christ? And it's an interesting That is an interesting thought with which to toggle while reading this short story. Now, one of them makes the point, one of the Roman soldiers makes the point, only the women stayed. People will leave you when things get dark. Very real truth to this short story. Here we have, presumably to all of those who were watching, the Christ in question being crucified, and everybody leaves. It's one of those things, it's one of those weird questions. What's the proper amount of time to stay? You watch a movie, do you stay through the credits? Maybe it's one of those Marvel movies, you gotta stay through the credits, right? There's one of those scenes at the end. If this is the Christ on a cross, is there a scene at the end? Do you stay through the credits? What's the proper amount of time before it's awkward? If you stay too long and watch, will those guards pick you next? Just an interesting little tidbit from here. Now, something that should get a whole lot of people riled up. The first soldier says, I don't think I marked it, but he says, "Did you see her girl, his girl? Wasn't I standing right by her? She's a nice looker," the first one said. The second soldier says, "I knew her before he did." He winks at the wine cellar. If this is the Christ, we know the she in question, Mary Magdalene, at least we're left to assume, both from this short story and from the Bible. The second soldier here is saying that he knew the Mary in question, he knew the her in question when she was a prostitute. Now, I am not a biblical scholar, but as I understand it, there is only a tenuous sort of line in some representations of the Bible between the prostitute from the story of, hey, let he who is without sin cast the first stone. We believe, or in pop culture, I guess I should say, that's Jesus's Mary, not Mother Mary, it's his Mary, right? He saves her there, and then she becomes his right-hand woman. As I understand it, that is not in some translations of the Bible necessarily what's going on there. These could be two completely different women. So that is another weird little thing. So this short story, one of the brilliant things about the short story is that there are all sorts of quandaries, I suppose you should say, around the Bible. Was the prostitute the same character as Jesus as Mary? Was there a Christ or the Christ? We'll get to some of the other questions in here as well. This short story teases, like you tease at your hair. This short story teases at some of those questions surrounding the text. So that is just an interesting sort of little thing about this short story. The other thing that, the next thing, number 4 there, that should stick out, they keep saying he did good in there. He did good in there. We're in an Ernest Hemingway short story. This sounds an awful lot like talking about a boxer. Ernest Hemingway wrote plenty of short stories about athletes and boxers. You would say something like, he looked good in there, about a boxer, about someone who is a prize fighter, about someone who is stepping into the ring to contend for a title. A title like the Christ. He was stepping in there, and boy, he sure did look good in there. He sure took it like a man, right? So this is a little bit of a nod that, hey, he really did good in there. He might have been the one. It is interesting here. Legend gives the first soldier a name. Longinus, however it is that you want to pronounce it. He's the one who pierced Jesus in the ribs. And this is another sort of thing about the Bible that is one of these things that is not necessarily a quandary. We'll go back to that phrase, a quandary. Pierced Jesus with the spear of destiny, as legend would have it. Legend extraneous to the Bible. Apocryphal stories name this character Longinus. This is, funnily enough, one of those things. So Christopher Hitchens, famous atheist, one of the arguments that he made to steel man Christianity as a movement was he said, look, I kind of believe that at least someone was crucified that went by the name Jesus, because they go through hell and high water in the Bible to legitimize this person when they wouldn't have to if they were just making it up. In my opinion, the Roman soldier sticking Jesus with the spear of destiny is one of the more interesting little tidbits about the writers of the Bible saying something more likely because it is true than to make it up, right? So in the days of the Bible being written, the Jesus in the Bible loses. He comes to earth and he is crucified by Roman soldiers and dies. To religions at the time, that seemed an absolute ridiculous notion. Why would you write your God coming back to earth and being killed by humans? Doesn't this make him a weak God? This was sort of the prevailing ethos of the day. A lot of people think that actually strengthens the case that a man named Jesus walked the streets of Rome and was crucified. Because if you were making up the story about a man that you claimed to be the Savior, at that time, there's no way you would have had him killed in the text. I don't particularly know the historicity of whether or not Roman soldiers often pierced the sides of people in order to get them to bleed out faster. I kind of think probably it did not happen. After all, or did not happen often. After all, it did not happen often because it would have been seen as having mercy on someone. After all, crucifixes were not expensive. Once you put them up, you don't have to do any maintenance. And as long as that person is there suffering, it serves as a warning to anyone who might be tempted to do the same things that that individual had done. Plus, it's not like, it was the Roman Empire. It's not like land was in particularly short supply. So I think probably the fact that in the text a Roman soldier comes and has mercy on him by stabbing him in the ribs in order to help him bleed out so he's not just hanging there for a long time is something that, in an ironic way, actually adds probability to the fact that these are real events. And then that last note there, this is just a Friday. It's Friday. The fact that the short story is called just Today is Friday is further evidence that this day and this event meant nothing to these Roman soldiers. Just an interesting thing to think about. Now, in the writer's corner portion of this is Ernest Hemingway. Don't do what Ernest Hemingway did. You're not allowed, right? This is written as a play. This is not conventional, but it saves dialogue tags from the writer. But at what expense? Did you find yourself in the same way that I did, glossing over which soldier was talking? It's not good, right? Now, he had, so these two points under the writer's corner kind of go hand in hand. He had to add those he had to add the front tags to the text, because one of the things for which Ernest Hemingway is notorious is leaving off dialogue tags. Now, Ernest Hemingway is such a master that in the midst of his short stories, whether there are dialogue tags or not, you know who's talking. That is not the case in this short story. So, because you can't tell the difference between these characters, instead of adding tags to the end of it, I bet what happened is Hemingway got to the end of the story, kind of liked it, knew the dialogue was garbage, and went through and made it a play. I would bet money that's how this happened. That said, you can't write this in the form of a play and get it published because you're not Ernest Hemingway. And I think that's actually solid advice. Because you saw Ernest Hemingway do it doesn't mean you should do it, especially in today's day and age where a lot of people, a lot of editors will see something clever and cut it outright. Go ahead and send you that rejection notice if you're that lucky. A lot of editors are... I've made a decent number of submissions in my day. Not in a while, but in my day. Had a decent... I think I had like an 8% acceptance rate. Again, I wasn't submitting to the New Yorker, anything like that. But so 92% rejection rate, right? Of that 92%, maybe 40% would send you the rejection notice. The rest of them have a listing where you go to submit something, and it says if you don't hear back in 6 months, consider the short story not ours. Most of the time, that's how it goes. Anyway, that is what I have for this short story discussion. If you like or appreciate what it is that I do here, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. If you find yourself here by chance but not design, literature is the only thing I talk about on this channel, dropping multiple videos every single week. There's poetry every Monday, and I hope to have you back for the next one.